Live from the State Street Executive Squash Court.
Oh, have they moved on to pickleball?
No, they're sticking with squash. Pickleball is too plebeian.
Oh.
It's the ESG industry's only weekly woke data podcast featuring BS man Matt Moscardi. Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed today. I'm not even going to lie.
In today's Everclear Sunny Gold, called May 17th, 2023, random ESG headlines, an anti-ESG update from Matt Moscardi, and a word from our sponsor about director elections. Is that what?
I love a word from our sponsor. Do you hear that word, people? Sponsor.
Our show today is being sponsored by S-Gage, your ESG data solutions provider.
Yeah, S-Gage for doing it right. We can't even fool around. I think there's so much to talk about.
Okay, let's just get through my stuff.
All right, here we go. What's your favorite music?
I don't really understand this music. Although
it's because we're American doing the news.
I was going to say that might be the theme music for the National Center for Public Policy Research. They might appreciate that music. All right.
It is.
Random ESG headlines first. I try to limit it to just a couple. CEO Elizabeth Holmes loses.
Oh, she's Elizabeth again.
And mostly I'm only, okay. Yeah, that's true. Is she Liz? Is she Elizabeth? And I'm mostly just reporting on this because I'm re-plugging our corporate theater podcast from yesterday. So download that and listen to it and share it.
It was really good.
All about Elizabeth Holmes. Good. She loses her bid to avoid prison and hit with a $452 million restitution bill. Most of which I read will be going to Rupert Murdoch.
Is it really?
Because remember this.
All right.
Remember what she was found criminally liable of was defrauding investors, right?
Investors, yeah. One of whom was Rupert Murdoch, who will now get the money back to pay for that defamation suit. Thank God, it's just in time.
And to find a new Tucker.
I don't think
that must be expensive.
I don't know that they're going to have to look that hard.
Yeah, they could call the National Center for Public Policy Research. They have a bunch of Tuckers. How about this one, Matt? Speaking of CEOs, college dropout and OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. He was in front of Congress yesterday here in the United States.
Oh, okay.
He was actually asking for more regulation over AI. Asking for regulation over AI, right?
Yeah.
Which, I'm not going to disagree with that.
You know how you regulate it?
Mm-hmm.
Stop making it.
Okay. Tell me if this is surprising to you or not. I found this fascinating in light of everything we cover here. He confirms that he owns zero equity in OpenAI. Is that a good thing, maybe? So he's really the anti-Mark Zuckerberg, I suppose?
That makes his eyeball scanning WorldCoin make much more sense.
Okay.
If you got
because he needs some scratch, he needs some money somewhere else.
Yeah, you got zero equity in the thing that you run that's going to be multi-trillion dollar.
But do we feel better about this, that he's not a dictator of OpenAI? I mean, do you feel better or worse?
Well, who does own the equity?
Well, this is what we don't know because it's not publicly traded.
Right. So maybe we feel worse?
I mean, we know Microsoft owns a chunk of it. No?
I mean, Microsoft bought in, but they're supposed to be a nonprofit, and then they switched to be a quasi-for-profit.
I don't know.
In order to then go back to a nonprofit. The whole thing is...
I thought it was interesting, though, but I got a woke data war update, anti-woke update. I know, you don't want to hear this.
This is what I spent all morning on.
No, well, you didn't cover this, but I was going to avoid all this. I was going to avoid the anti-woke stuff and the Elon Musk crap. I think I did officially avoid Elon Musk, so that's good. But
you just talked about him.
There's a new entry into the Bud Light stories, and that's Miller Lite. And here's the problem: is the headline is "Women drinking beer clothed. Why are right wingers melting down over Miller Lite?" So there's a commercial pointing to long-standing sexism in beer ads that has sparked outrage and led to a campaign of harassment. Conservatives are hopping mad after discovering a 2-month-old Miller Lite commercial that was released during Women's History Month.
Where is everybody when things happen? I mean, the Dylan Mulvaney thing was like from December, wasn't it? It wasn't it like there's like this long lag between when something happens and anyone notices.
I mean, they're pretty dopey, these people. So give me a break. So Miller, this is a self-own from Miller Lite talking about the long history of misogyny in beer advertising, and no one can really refute that. I mean,
have you look? Just spend 7 seconds Googling old Super Bowl commercials, like from the 90s, and you will realize.
I don't think you have to go that far back. You don't have to go that far back.
GoDaddy literally exists because of cleavage. Yeah. That was it. That was the whole thing.
Unlike Anheuser-Busch, which punted and in fact fired the woman in charge of giving Dylan Mulvaney a can of beer.
Mm-hmm. One can, one time.
They're acting very different over at Miller Lite, which I believe is owned by Molson Coors.
I think it's actually owned by Anheuser-Busch.
Oh. Is Molson Coors... Okay, well, The Guardian has this wrong, though, because they're claiming that Molson Coors is reacting very differently than Anheuser-Busch.
Oh, no, yeah. Molson Coors is listed in as the owner, but somebody else has it as Anheuser-Busch too.
Here's what
no one knows who owns.
Here's
anyone.
what a company spokesperson said from Molson Coors. This video was about two things: warm poop, because they're talking about they're gonna take the old ads, they're gonna shred them down, the old misogynistic ads, they're gonna shred them, they're gonna turn them into fertilizer to help grow, more.
Wait, back up.
Yeah.
This is an executive who said this?
Yes, this is an executive. This video was about two things: warm poop and saying women should not be forced to mud wrestle in order to sell beer. Neither of these things should be remotely controversial, and we hope beer drinkers can appreciate the humor and ridiculousness of this video from back in March. So they're actually like, F you, right?
Wow. They didn't just say it was that one time. And I don't know the number. I don't have the data around this, but the number of times an executive have had to point out that something was about warm poop.
They're also supporting the woman who came up with this ad campaign by saying people can take issue with our ads or our brands, but we won't stand by as people personally attack our employees, especially given that these are... Matt, this is the good part. Especially given that these are company decisions and are never made by one single person. I mean, really, are these not like the biggest Business Pants fans ever? They basically took everything we complained about and turned it into a win here.
I mean, that was like Ari and Jesse's point. They had to get vetted by 70 different people.
Incredible.
And they're just saying, yeah,
incredible.
It does.
Yeah. So I had to point this out because this one, I don't know, this was just fantastic.
This is really good. That's good. You know what? I'm going to drink nothing but terrible Miller Lite from now on.
Yes. Moving on. I found 3 maybe interesting proxy votes. I have interesting in air quotes.
Yeah.
Here we go. First, let's start at Intel. Actually, let's end at Intel because it kind of it goes into what you're talking about.
My nonsense.
Let's start at AIG. AIG CEO and chair Peter Zaffino. He got $75 million in pay last year because he got a special equity grant worth $50 million. And why, Matt? It's because he has exemplary leadership, unique financial, technical, and operational capabilities. Matt, he's only been there for 2 years. He's been there for 2 years. He gets a special $50 million equity dump. All he has to do to get that money is to stay on the job for 5 more years. No performance hurdles. Just be alive and keep your job.
Well, it's a high barrier.
Let me tell you.
Was he up for being poached? Is that did he get a job offer and went to the board and was like, I got a job offer I'm considering, and they were like, here's $50 million. Stick around.
Here's what shareholders say. They said a big fat no.
Yeah.
68% said no. 68%.
68%.
That's huge.
Wait a minute. When your methodology is unique financial, technical, and operational capabilities, how could you say no?
Yeah.
Can we do what? At what point? How far removed from 2008 do we have to be to stop only thinking about AIG as the company that blew up in 2008? Like that's the only thing I think about.
The best part of all this is that when you're in the proxy statement, they give you all kinds of tables and stuff about the percentage of CEO pay that's this and the percentage of that. But for each one they give, there's a footnote that says not including the CEO's $50 million special equity award. And finally, Norfolk Southern. Remember Norfolk Southern?
Oh yeah, vaguely.
I mean, the biggest. Probably
stopped doing trains because they got woke, right?
Yeah, probably the biggest apology tour so far of 2023. A horrific accident there in Ohio. CEO Alan Shaw has has not apologized to everything.
Yeah, I think he eventually came around
apologized.
And said something that was vaguely resembling an apology.
This company was an absolute shit show. I was waiting. I was very excited for the annual meeting to see how shareholders would react, Matt. This is how they reacted. Nobody is mad at nothing or nobody. In fact, CEO Alan Shaw got the highest percentage of yes votes for re-election. 99%.
Wow.
99% are with this guy.
You can't get 99% of humans to agree the sky is blue.
And only one director, Matt, someone that you talked about, the chair of the safety committee, Michael Lockhart, only one got over 10% no votes. That was him, Michael Lockhart. He got 88% said yes. 88%.
Actually, let's pause for a second and congratulate ourselves.
Yeah.
That was entirely us. Like, there's nobody, he was not in the news once. There was no reports about him. There's no, analysis of him. Our data pulled him out and said, look how bad he is at stuff.
Yeah.
I think that people are listening.
I guess,
finally.
But all he's going to get is a red flag at MSCI. That's about all he'll get.
He won't even. No, I think he's still above the threshold. Is it?
No, it's above 10%. Isn't it above 10% now?
All right, good. Now, a negative 0.1 deduction.
Okay, the last one I tagged was from Intel. So a group wanted this is a shareholder proposal. A group wanted a third-party review of whether the company's activities and expenditures related to doing business in China align with its ESG commitments. So basically this group was touting the virtues of its ESG initiatives, right? It was supporting the ESG commitments and saying, well, what about China? Are you doing this in China too, right?
Oh, interesting. Oh, this tastes anti-woke to me, but also not.
Yeah, I'm very confused by this, and this is where I'm going to hand off to you, Matt, because again, they're touting Intel's ESG commitments, right? And this is coming from the National Center for Public Policy Research, which you have pointed out many times is the most anti-ESG organization going. So So this is what they're doing. They're I don't even understand. You're gonna have to help me. They're using their fake love of ESG to be anti-China. Like, what are they even doing here, Matt? I don't understand this.
Okay, well, I can tell you. Yeah. This is the old trick proposal.
Help me.
Which they are trying to make it sound like an ESG proposal. Like, all we're trying to do is be like all the ESG proposals. But they're also trying to use it to say, like, you're all Chinese globalist loving.
So is this about greenwashing? This is about that they're too pro-China? Is this about, like, being snarky jerks? Like, what is this about?
It's really hard to
I'll tell you, the shareholders were not buying this one. They supported this to the tune of 0.04%.
Wow. A solid 0.04.
Matt, that's even less than a tenth of 1%.
I mean, you could probably count the number of votes that is at like one voter, right? Like that's Strive's holdings.
Yeah, it's probably Strive's holdings.
It's just Strive.
So that's the segue. And I'll also give you this as the other segue is that the Wall Street Journal had a kind of a piss poor, sad propaganda piece yesterday. It's in its op-ed. Its editorial board had a story called "The ESG Proxy Vote Ranking Is your asset manager voting based on the interests of investors or for political agendas? Uh-oh.
No, what, bro?
So I handed it off to you. I didn't really want to cover this, but I got into the rabbit hole too. But you have a lot more reporting on this. So,
yeah, there's a lot here. So actually, can we do this? Can we turn it over to Paul for now, and then we'll come back to me?
Oh, a tease. Yeah. So when we
we'll come back to this,
we're going to dive into the Wall Street Journal's anti-ESG editorial.
There's a lot to talk about. Okay,
God.
Here we go.
Hello, Paul Hodgson here from S-Gage Statistic of the Week. I've dragged myself off my sickbed to make this recording, so hopefully I won't cough my way through it. So we're going to look at director elections this week, and we're going to look at them in terms of the numbers of directors receiving significant votes against their election. So they're looked at in two ways: directors receiving less than 70% of shares voted, and the number of directors receiving less than 50% of shares voted. Now, over the years, the number of directors receiving less than 70% of shares voted has steadily increased from 304 in 2018 to 448 in 2022. There are only 99 so far in 2023, but it's early days in this year's proxy season. On the other hand, the number of directors receiving less than 50% of shares voted has gone up and down over the years, from 53 in 2018 to 89 in 2022, but it was at a high of 104 in 2021. So I'm just going to switch out the analysis a little bit here and look at the statistics by index as well. So we're looking at those figures were for the Russell 3000. So what we're looking at now are figures for the Russell 3000 and the S&P 500. Now I'm just going to look at the 2022 figures, which is the latest full year, the one with 448 of directors receiving less than 70% of shares voted. And looking at them by index, you can see there's the vast majority of those directors receiving less than 70%, and also the vast majority of those receiving less than 50% were found in the Russell 3000 outside the S&P 500. Only 54 directors received less than 70% of shares voted in the S&P 500, and only 10 received less than 50% of shares voted in the S&P 500. So most of the directors receiving low vote support are in smaller companies, mid-caps and small caps. And that pattern is repeated for all of the years back to 2018. So now I'm going to switch the analysis from index to sector. And what we're looking at now, again, we're looking at 2022, the last full year. And we can see that, in fact, there are a number of significant differences in the fortunes of directors by industry. For example, communication services, consumer staples, materials, and utilities very rarely get any significant votes against directors. Very small numbers there. On the other hand, healthcare, information technology, financials, and consumer discretionary companies are much more commonly receiving significant votes against directors. In healthcare, for example, 115, much higher than anybody else, directors received less than 70% of shares voted, and only 21 received 50%, less than 50% of shares voted. But again, both of those are much higher figures than almost everybody else except consumer discretionary, where 23 directors received less than 50% of the shares voted. The next highest number of directors receiving less than 70% is in information technology at 61, and then there's financials at 55 and consumer discretionary also at 55. Of course, these numbers pale into insignificance when looked at the number of directors being elected overall, which runs in the tens of thousands. However, the statistics do indicate a growing level of dissatisfaction with directors and a growing willingness to vote against them. So this is Paul Hodgson with S-Gage Statistic of the Week, signing off. And I managed to get through it without coughing.
Wow.
He did sneeze a few times, though.
So first of all, I do want to say, Paul, that what he said about directors in oil and gas and energy getting fewer votes against, directly contradicts what I'm about to tell you.
Ooh, I like
the
it.
anti-woke want us to
Double
think.
segue.
So you like that? Like that segue? Here we go. Let's do this thing. All right. So first of all, I want to do a proxy vote of my own before I come back to that editorial in the op-ed
you're
in the Wall Street Journal.
entitled. You can order any way you want.
And here's why. Because you mentioned a few of these interesting air quote proxy votes about anti-wokey, ESG, confusing things. They're doing it better now because now they've gone full QAnon. Here is a vote from Marriott International. It is item number 6 on the proxy, if you're reading it. It is a resolution requesting the company publish a congruency report on partnerships with globalist organizations. Now, if that feels a little hard right kind of talking point. You don't really hear globalist in a proxy
unless
anywhere.
you're listening to an Elon Musk tweet. You don't typically hear that language.
This is one filed
in fact,
by
I've never seen anything so openly either anti-Semitic or QAnon or whatever it is.
I mean, it's picked its lane, and it really is in its lane. It was filed by the National Center of Public Policy Research, one of the largest anti-woke proxy filers, and what they want is an analysis, a report disclosing how voluntary partnerships with these globalist organizations is congruent with shareholder duty, I guess. That's kind of what they want. Here's the proponent's statement. They basically list out that Marriott does not list themselves as a partner or associated with in any way with the World Economic Forum, the Business Roundtable, Council of Foreign Relations, the Rockefeller Foundation,
the globalist groups,
or the Bilderberg Group, which I am now going to think of these 5 as the globalists. I didn't realize.
Sure.
I just thought it was World Economic Forum, but there's 5 of them now. The Business Roundtable is a globalist group.
Okay.
And then they list all the things that aren't listed on Marriott's website, including that the World Economic Forum sponsored by Marriott, as in they sponsored conferences so that people would stay in their hotels. They were angry about that. They didn't disclose that.
This is they're angry about the fact that Marriott International is sponsoring some of their hotels that exist across the globe, including ones at convention centers that house things.
Angry. That was enough to make one angry.
Sure.
That they had a...
Feels very bottom line-y, though, doesn't it? Like, to support your bottom line, would you not want to be supporting these international hotels that are your product?
The conference does have people that go to it and need to stay in hotels. It does
ostensibly.
Seem to,
we don't have
to line up
direct
very
proof
neatly.
of that. Yeah.
The Business Roundtable, the CEO sits on the Business Roundtable alongside, may I add, Lynn Good of Duke Energy, Lance Fritz of Union Pacific, Greg Hayes of Raytheon, Doug McMillan of Walmart, Scott Kirby of United Airlines. These are all the wokes, right? They're all sitting on the Business Roundtable, the wokies. The Council of Foreign Relations, they mentioned that a past executive, a former Marriott president, was on the Council of Foreign Relations. Former president? A former president. This was a problem. They didn't disclose that someone who used to work at Marriott years ago sat on this thing. And finally, they talk about Denise Naguib, who's their sustainability officer, who worked with the Rockefeller Foundation on a thing. What she did was write a blog post with the Rockefeller Foundation. So that's the association, the deep association happening. They accused the board of concealing these partnerships, and that these partnerships the radical agendas are troubling, including how World Economic Forum advocates for transhumanism, abolishing private property, eating bugs, social credit systems, and the Great Reset.
Okay.
Now, I did a piece-by-piece detail of what those things are. No one wants to hear it. Suffice it to say that none of it makes sense. Like all of it is taken out of context.
I'll tell you how much it really doesn't make sense is that caught up in this anti-globalist, anti-Semitic rhetoric is Elon Musk, who is tweeting bizarrely about George Soros, blah, 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 But that the woman he just appointed, the glass cliffiest woman ever, Linda Yaccarino, to be the CEO of Twitter, used to work at the World Economic Forum. So which he has said that he hates and his followers hate. So the whole thing is just nonsense. It's a bunch of nonsense.
Very, very confusing.
Okay, yeah.
But all I'm saying is I expect the proxy vote game of the anti-woke they're going to up their game. If we're talking about globalists and votes.
So we're gonna start to mirror like Trumpian rhetoric. It's gonna get dirtier and more vulgar. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, isn't that the only place this can go? I mean, they're talking about one of the things that bothered them about their association with the World Economic Forum is the World Economic Forum says to eat more bugs.
Well, okay, we know
how is this relevant?
We know that most corporations try to exclude shareholder proposals. I wonder if the corporations tried to exclude, say, this one or.
Yes.
Or okay.
Sure.
But then again, they try to exclude them all, so that's not really saying anything, right?
It is funny that the board had to respond to this one.
Mm-hmm. They don't have to respond,
without
but they do.
Just writing in, ha, 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 this is a joke, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they had to say that the company and its members and leaders represent industry and business interests globally.
I mean, Marriott International represents business interests globally. Okay.
Globally. Yeah, they had to say that. They had to write that down. And they had to say that these organizations generally provide opportunities to get new clients.
Yeah, they're giant networking groups of other CEOs.
Which
is basically what the S&P 500 board of directors system is.
That's all it is.
So why don't we should have proposals just to cancel boards. We should have no more boards. We should have no more companies, no more corporations. We shouldn't have people.
There you go. Answer correct. And that all of these partnerships were reviewed by their global public policy team, the president and CEO and senior executive leaders.
They admitted to having a globalist executive.
They admitted that they looked at these things. It wasn't secret. Mm-hmm. In fact, they even said they disclosed this on one of their websites.
Sure.
So none of this is hidden. And they had to add at the end, we don't endorse every policy position, but basically and to ask us to do a report on everybody else's policy positions and whether or not we agree with them and how is not feasible. Mm-hmm. So I expect that the National Center for Public Policy Research, which is led by a man named Dave Ridenour.
Yeah, he took over for his sister who founded the organization who died.
And he's been running it for 37 years. Prior to doing actually this, he was his own LinkedIn says that he's very proud of this. Mm-hmm. That it says the National Center of Public Policy Research is a free market think tank described by Nation magazine as crucial gear in the right's propaganda factory.
Right.
He wrote that into his bio. He's very proud.
Well, the Nation
he is a propagandist.
The Nation is just a bunch of loons.
Prior to doing this, he was an executive director at something called the U.S. Youth Council, which was a CIA-funded front to look for communists in the 60s in youth groups.
Wow.
I'm not lying. This is all real. It's all right there. And it was dissolved when he was there because Congress made a rule that said you cannot spy on American citizens anymore. And then they lost all their funding and went bankrupt.
Good to know.
That's what he did before, okay?
Yeah.
Let's bring this back. So let's bring this back to
the op-ed piece, Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal op-ed, which is my favorite op-ed of any op-ed I've ever read. And by that, I mean the stupidest.
Yeah, it's hard to get through, to be honest, but go ahead.
It was written by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity.
The op-ed was written by the editorial board about this paper.
A report.
From the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. That sounds like the Excellence Group again, right?
Unleash
Unleash prosperity, yeah.
So they wrote an op-ed about this paper released by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, who unleashed a report unleashing grades on how funds unleash wokeness through their votes, right?
Sure.
Like there's a lot of unleashing going on.
Yeah.
This is what they did. They hand-selected what they called the Fiduciary Free 50.
Yes, it's catchy. I like that.
Isn't that great?
That's alliteration, Matt.
There's not enough alliteration.
Fiduciary Free 50. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. In which they hand-selected.
That sounds like a robust methodology. Yes.
The
Hand-selected.
50, this is a quote. They picked the 50, quote, most radical proposals related to left-wing activism.
Yes.
They picked 50
I'm
shareholder
frightened.
proposals.
Yeah, I'm already frightened.
Radical left-wing.
Yeah,
Radical.
Kill Whitey, I think. Yeah, that's what this proposal said.
That was the title of each one.
Yeah.
They then went through and they assigned scores. They said if a fund votes for one of these radical left-wing Fiduciary Free 50, they get 0 points. If they abstain, they get 5 points. So basically they quit and don't vote.
Yeah.
And if they vote against it, they get 10 points because they must love America.
Yeah, help me out, though, with this 50 of the most extreme ESG-oriented proposals, because I couldn't really figure out how they determined that. Were you able to determine how they picked these?
Well, there was one clear pattern.
Yes.
24 of the 50 just said anything related to climate change.
Okay, but there are several dozen others, right, that say climate change?
They picked it at 50 big companies. That's all they did.
Okay, but still, you're not exactly explaining a methodology here.
Well, I'm pretty sure what they did, because they did not mention a data source.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure what they did was go to Proxy Monitor, which is run by the Manhattan Institute.
I go there. Yeah.
A free governance
it's a great
source
site.
of proxy votes.
Yep.
Their website, if you want to see it, covers a Fortune 250. And you can see every vote for the last 20 years there.
Yeah.
It's really a brilliant
I use it
thing.
all the time. Great
I'm pretty
resource.
sure that's where they basically just looked for the wokest things they could see there in the last year.
But again, wokest by what set of criteria? Do we know?
Well, I think they don't know either.
Okay, that's the important
Because here's
part.
what I found.
Yeah.
Among the Fiduciary Free 50, the radical left-wing agenda, activist agenda in proxy voting, they identified these two proposals. One at Twitter, considered radical left-wing activism.
Yes.
Filed by the National Legal and Policy Center.
Yeah.
And it actually says it's about a racial... Oh, no. This one's about lobbying.
Yeah.
Political
expenditures.
It turns out the National Legal and Policy Center is an anti-woke.
Oh, so they did.
Activist.
So as part of the methodology to pick the 50 most left-wing proposals, they didn't actually read the proposals. They didn't actually.
They
just
read
picked
the proponents.
things that they were triggered by. Yeah, whether it came from the left wing or the right wing, they just picked things.
So they managed to sneak this right-wing one in the radical left-wing ones.
Yeah.
And they picked this proposal at Johnson & Johnson for a racial equity audit. Now, we know.
Yes.
From Strive Asset Management.
Sounds very woke.
The number one thing you ask your financial advisor about is number one.
Yeah. Do you care about black people?
If this is a racial equity audit, then I'm out.
Yes.
Has this company ever done it?
If you're even thinking about fighting systemic racism, we're goodbye.
Goodbye. Vote against.
Vote
You're
against.
out as my manager.
You're not excellent.
That
was America.
That was Strive's suggestion as the first question you should ask every financial advisor.
Yes.
They basically highlighted this proposal for a racial equity audit at Johnson & Johnson as super anti-woke radical leftist agenda.
Super duper left.
Filed by the National Center for Public Policy. Filed by the same exact people who we just talked about.
So,
globalists.
And you haven't, it's not like you've looked at all 50 of the most extreme left-wing ESG proposals, but you've already found two that actually came from the right wing.
I hand-selected, I randomly was clicking through the links and actually reading them.
Yeah.
And here's the quote from the proposal. Quote, if the company is, in the name of racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, committing illegal discrimination against employees deemed non-diverse,
Sure.
that's the problem.
Yeah.
What they said is, you are discriminating against white people by including black people. That's what the proposal was about, right?
Strong stand there.
To make this worse, the National Center for Public Policy and the Committee to Unleash Prosperity actually has a guy who works in both places.
Who's
DeRoy Murdoch,
Okay.
no relation to the Murdoch family.
Not
DeRoy
yet.
Murdoch, O-C-K, last name, is a fellow at the National Center for Public Policy and an advisory board member at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. They have the same people working at
shocking.
each other.
You know, while we're on the topic, can I just quickly tell you that the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, it's run by 4 principal people. I'll quickly tell you who they are. One is Nepo baby Steve Forbes.
Ooh.
Steve Forbes, he's part of a lot of this hand-wringing and crying about ESG. You always see him there. He's always around. We have the co-authors of Trumponomics. That's Arthur Laffer and Steve Moore.
Ooh, Arthur Laffer. Yeah, he's a guy.
Steve Moore co-founded the Club for Growth with Harlan Crow, who is a billionaire in the news because he's the sugar daddy of Clarence Thomas.
Oh, really?
And then Phil Kirpin, who co-founded another one of these groups with the money from the Koch brothers. So it's just an incestuous group of people, kind of. It's an echo chamber of what I call, and I think this is the official language, disgruntled old rich white dudes. And I'm not even saying that flippantly. When you look at the principles of these groups,
they're all white men.
It's always disgruntled old rich white dudes. Always.
And you mentioned Steve Forbes. Now, I didn't do a deep
Nepo
dive,
baby Steve Forbes,
but Nepo baby Steve Forbes, actually, he heads the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. He was at the Heritage.
Just when you say that, it's hard not to giggle.
It's ridiculous. He was at the Heritage Foundation with Ed Haselmayer, who is on the board of National Center for Public Policy.
Well, there you go.
So they're all linked here. It's not that hard. And so not only do they do right-on-right crime by selecting 2 proposals filed by the anti-woke as radical left agenda, but they actually, in the methodology I could discern, because I don't know how they picked the 50, it just seems random, they gave them grades. So they gave them grades A through F.
I like that. Yeah.
That's easy, right?
Yeah.
And they created basically percentages for how often they voted for or against these terrible, terrible left-wing agenda proposals that they turn into a 0 to 10 score.
Or as your reporting has turned out, some of them are actually right-wing. I'm a little confused by this, but whatever.
Some agenda, apparently.
Keep going. Yeah, keep going.
But it's very simple, right? Like they take a number and divide it by the total, and you get a percentage of the possible, right? So, so for instance, BlackRock, according to their score, out of a total number of like 17,000 points, they get like, some thousand, and it came to a 6.8. They just took 68% times 10, 6.8. Now, if you were to take a 5-letter scale and break it up into a 0 to 10 score, the easy thing to do,
the obvious thing to do, you mean?
10 divided by 5 means every 2 points you go to a new letter grade. That's what they do.
Quintiles.
Yeah, that's what they do everywhere.
Quintiles.
Right? Well, if you had done that, the problem was that BlackRock and JP Morgan get Bs.
If you do actual normal quintiles,
they actually look anti-woke.
Yeah,
according to regular math.
So how do they do it?
In order to avoid that, they
so
made the
stupid.
Scales 1.9, 1.9, 1.9, 2.5, 1. They just changed the size of what you consider A, B, C, D, E, and like A, B, C, D, F.
Okay.
Such that they couldn't make it work so that BlackRock would be an F. That would have been great. But instead, they managed to make BlackRock a C and JP Morgan a C. And they were happy enough with that, saying like, look, they're woke. They're pretty woke.
Yeah. Well, you know what they did, which is just absolutely wonderful, which I love the most, Matt, is that it's not actually an A, B, C, D. This is how stupid they are, which I love. I love you guys for this. So if you're listening, I know you are. Please call us. It's not actually A, B, C, D, F. It's not actually a typical quintile system. There's one you're forgetting, Matt.
I'm not forgetting.
Yeah. Are you going to talk about it? There's an F minus.
Yes, there is.
There's actually something worse than failure.
Yeah. Which is they split the F in half in order to show how bad some people were.
Yeah, so F is from 0 to 3 essentially, and there's a sub failure category,
but you can see how badly this works.
Yeah.
When I look at real math, JP Morgan and BlackRock end up with B grades. Fidelity, T. Rowe Price, Vanguard end up with A grades. State Street ends up with a C, which means 90% of the largest portfolio managers in the world, they call not woke. That doesn't make such a great report for the Committee to Unleash Prosperity.
No.
That's not really unleashing much prosperity. So the best thing you can do is just change the grades just enough so that State Street is a D, BlackRock and JP Morgan are C's, and we can flip out about how woke everybody is in the entire world.
Yeah, because according to the math, Goldman Sachs, State Street, TIAA, Kraft, they'd all be C's.
They'd all be C's.
But somehow they magically enter D category.
According to real math, most of them are just, they're actually, they would all be woke. So that's what I got for you.
I love it. Somebody had to do it. Somebody had to do it.
Honestly, this may sound like a rambling mess because I spent 4 hours this morning.
Oh, I feel your pain. It is a labyrinth. It is a rabbit hole labyrinth of weirdness when you start to go into these organizations' websites.
But this is how, like, if you want to shit on ESG ratings, every time you come up with a rating, there's something in there that you can find that's ridiculous. And
yeah, but we would never get away with this type of methodology.
I know. This is
I don't know what this is.
Stupidest methodology. The gaps are the stupidest gaps of any gaps I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
This makes no sense.
No.
Unless you really want a BlackRock to be C.
Or unless it's just a bunch of political theater.
Oh, that's
which I'm not suggesting it is.
Speaking of theater, that's our show. You should go see the actual Corporate Business Pants Theater starting June 3rd
That's right.
June 9th in Portland, Maine. You can go see the Business Pants Corporate Theater
Just
players.
voted by U.S. News World Report as the 6th best place to live. Come on, what are you waiting for? Come visit.
And the Corporate Theater was just voted by my kids and wife the funniest show that I make them listen to in the car.
That's making me feel sad.
You need to go see them. Otherwise, come back tomorrow where we'll play some sort of game, and that's it. Good.